So David, thank you for coming on the show, back to the show. Of course, it's your second time here. So let's dive right into this. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So let's start off with the NDP getting a lot of criticism, obviously by Andrew Wilkinson, your nearby neighbor in the constituency just south of you, over deciding to proceed with a snap election. Why do you think it is that you're getting that criticism today? And what was the decision-making process around choosing to have such a quick election?
Well, let me just start by saying it's great to be back, Andrew. Thanks for having me on the podcast again. You know, I think it's been maybe even a couple of years.
About a year, actually.
About a year?
Yeah.
Since I was on the podcast and you've done so well. And we were saying before we came on, the fact that you kept going, that you've had success with it. I just want to really recognize that, because podcasts come and go, but you're going the distance. And thanks for having me. And thanks to your listeners. For the election, for the reason why the Premier decided to call an election, it's pretty straightforward. We have a minority parliament with about 12 months left in the mandate. The recovery from the pandemic for British Columbia is going to take years. The economic plans that we're rolling out are multi-year plans. And for British Columbians, the Premier believed, and for businesses and for others, the Premier believed the best plan was to get stability, to get a mandate for the party to bring British Columbia through the next 4 years of recovery. It didn't seem to serve anybody to have inconsistency about whether or not programs that are started now would be continued, would be dismantled. And we want to make sure that people have certainty that when we're making commitments to do a multi-year program, it'll be delivered so that they can invest and they can make decisions based on that, because we've got a lot of rebuilding to do. It's obviously a difficult decision for the Premier. He really wrestled with it, and he was quite public about that. And I think that, for myself, recognizing that even a year from now, when the fixed date election was, that we'd still be in a pandemic, having that consistency for a 4-year mandate for whatever party is successful in the election is going to be an important thing for British Columbians going forward.
One of the questions, or one of the things that came up with Sonia Furstenau that came on the news, is that apparently she called John Horgan on the Friday just before he made that announcement, saying, "You've got our support. We've got 2 seats that we represent. You guys have 47, I think. So between the two, you've got a majority effectively." But then John Horgan came back and said, "Well, yeah, but there were 2 things that were recently tried to get passed in the Legislative Assembly that weren't supported by the Green Party," and so he didn't feel that was the case. How do you see that? Do you support that view?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to say that I enjoyed very much working with Sonia and Adam in the legislature, and with Andrew Weaver.
Andrew Weaver,
one of the Andrew W's, with Andrew Weaver in the legislature. And I certainly share a lot of common ground with people who support the Green Party and with people who represent the Green Party in the legislature.
Yeah.
We have some important points of difference, but we share a lot of ground. And so I'm extremely reluctant to criticize them because I think they were quite sincere in their intent to support the government. But even with their support, it doesn't provide British Columbians with certainty, multi-year certainty around government programs going forward.
Yeah.
And the Premier was very concerned about a couple of bills that, one that was killed and one that didn't, that was ultimately supported in the legislature, but was on a confidence matter. And I know that was part of his decision-making process. To me, the need for multi-year consistency in the recovery plan was an essential element to the Premier's decision.
Okay. There's an old saying which is, "There's a bird in the hand is better two in the bush." And you guys are ranking really well right now in the polls. Is it fair to say that part of the reason behind this is that this is, from a strategic standpoint, simply a really good time, not knowing what the future is going to hold? This is a good time for you guys to lock down a majority.
I ran in 2013.
Okay.
With the NDP. I had run in a 2011 by-election and then was running in the general in 2013 when I was first elected.
Yeah.
And the polls looked very similar for the NDP at that time under Adrian Dix.
Okay.
I remember a cover of the province. This man could kick a dog and still be the premier of British Columbia. It was sort of a tasteless headline, but illustrated how inevitable everybody thought the NDP's victory was going to be. So I'm not the only person who was in that election or the only person in our party who remembers that polls can collapse in a hurry in this province. Especially when people are saying they're going to vote for the provincial Conservative Party. Those votes typically all go to the BC Liberals, especially when people say they're going to vote for a particular party in a moment because they're feeling good about something that happened, but then they change their mind later on. So campaigns matter, and I think you're absolutely right to some degree. In the sense that, yes, the polls are positive right now for the NDP, and rightfully so. I think Premier Horgan did a great job with Adrian Dix and Bonnie Henry on the pandemic. I think we've done a good job as a government in doing the things we said we were going to do, the biggest middle-class tax cut through the MSP elimination. Other initiatives like that, environmental initiatives and economic initiatives, childcare, schools, I could go on. But so there's a reason and there's a structure behind those support numbers. But the irony of people pointing out the poll numbers is, regardless, the issues of the pandemic, the issues of stability, the issues that the Premier has raised are there. And they don't go away simply because of a poll or not. I have to say, I am very skeptical about polls after my experience in 2013.
Last question on this topic for me is, are British Columbians is their health being put at risk for the sake of the NDP calling a snap election, in your view, from a perspective of having to get out, go to polls and vote and that type of thing, and knowing that there's a global pandemic and the more social interaction people have, the more, there's more cross-contamination of this virus.
Sure.
Are British Columbians truly being, or is that not really something that you guys see as being an issue?
Well, from the beginning of the pandemic, we've relied on the scientists and the independent officers to get us through this process. And so when I hear from Elections BC and Bonnie Henry that we can do this in a manner that's safe, I believe them.
Yeah.
And I also have confidence in Elections BC to do this. If we can grocery shop and if we can do these other things, then we can line up and vote. And most people seem to be aligned on this. Initially, the Liberals made some comment about a dangerous election, but if you visit their website now, you can see that they agree that you can vote safely and that this will be. And if you're concerned, you can do a mail-in ballot. I think a significant number of people will do a mail-in ballot. We've seen elections in New Brunswick done safely.
Yeah.
And so. And the concern that people have about the pandemic doesn't go away a year from now.
Sure.
Most experts say we're a year out from a vaccine and distribution and widespread immunity from that. And so regardless, there would be a pandemic election, and it's now or 12 months from now.
Right. I believe that amongst all the sadness of COVID and the deaths that have happened, there's going to be some phenomenal disruptions that happen. And one of them I'm hopeful is that we can see a progression or an improvement in the way in which we can vote. It's unfortunate to me that people don't vote. It'd be nice to see a higher voter turnout. But if we can make it easier for people by mail-in or ideally eventually by online somehow, which I'm sure most millennials would support, I think we'll get a much higher participation in politics, which would be nice. What can British Columbians expect from a majority BC NDP government over the next 4 years?
If people like what they've seen over the last 3.5 years, they will see more of that. They will see economic development, keeping in mind the realities of carbon pollution and climate change. They will see an emphasis on investing in people in our province around schools and education. The best guide I think that's available to people is the economic restart work that we set out in the sort of week before the election was announced. People can look at that. That is what we will be implementing. And so for Vancouverites, it means important changes in terms of housing, increasing emphasis on housing affordability. It means important shifts around how our economy is building towards the growth in the sector, which is clean economic development, and for BC to be a real player in that. And I think the pandemic has really underlined for us the need for British Columbia to be increasingly self-reliant, that we need to have food security, that the concerns that people had about empty shelves in our grocery stores, and all of a sudden understanding the connections that we have to California and where a lot of our food comes from, and other supply chains that need for us to be more resilient in the face of disruption of those supply chains, especially with the trends around government in the United States. There will be a great interest, and there is a great interest in our government in increasing that ability of British Columbia to stand strong in the face of these kinds of disruptions that are probably going to become more regular.
Yeah. Let's assume, so I think, thank you for that. So that's a good overview. David, let's assume that you don't get a majority. Let's assume that you go back to your job after the election, and we're back in the exact same spot. 2 seats by the Greens, and let's assume there's no independents that win, and the NDP have 48 seats, and the BC Liberals have 48 seats. What do things look like then?
We have seen that movie before,
Yeah.
and I don't see any reason why it would play out differently. The parties would have to figure out a way to work together, and whoever could would form government.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, let's jump to the 2 signature issues in your wheelhouse, being money laundering and pipelines. I'd like to talk about pipelines first.
Sure.
So just to kind of paint the picture, your party, as I understand it, is basically anti-pipeline, or at least you're anti-TMX. You can comment on that in a moment. And I think you're pretty strongly supported by Jagmeet Singh and the federal NDP. There's what I see as an outside observer, pretty high alliance there. John Horgan and Jagmeet Singh have been on tape together talking about this issue. You fought it as from a legal perspective, and I don't remember exactly what happened. You can enlighten us, but we lost, as I understood. So first of all, first question is, does the BC NDP oppose the pipeline coming through to the coastal waters here in BC, or articulate on that? And then number 2 is, what tools do you have in the toolbox as far as what else can you do to fight this fight?
Well, from the beginning, we have been incredibly concerned about this project that is going to bring this diluted bitumen into the harbor in Vancouver.
And just to be clear, we're talking about the TMX.
The TMX pipeline.
The doubling of the pipeline.
Yeah, that's right.
20th pipeline, okay.
And the concern is based on the absolutely catastrophic impacts that a spill would have on Vancouver's economy. Our in pre-COVID, and it will be again post-COVID, our economy in Vancouver built in no small part on our reputation for it being a clean environment, pristine kind of Wales, vibe in Vancouver, and a spill that can immediately tarnish our reputation around tourism, around companies that might want to invest, and so on, would be devastating. And so British Columbia is asked to take on a huge amount of risk, and the project is yet another example, in my opinion, of a project that takes raw resources out of Canada, does not develop them here, does not refine them here, does not add value to them here, and ships them somewhere else for that value add process to take place. At some point, this country and our province, and we've started that work in British Columbia, especially with respect to forestry, at some point we have to say we need to be adding value to these products here. And so from an environmental point of view, from an economic point of view, this project doesn't make sense because we know that we need refined product here in the Lower Mainland. People still use cars that burn gasoline and so on. But what's proposed to be in the pipeline is not gasoline. It's proposed to be diluted bitumen. So that's, in a nutshell, the reasons for opposing the pipeline. We went to the courts. We believed that we had the ability to put conditions on.
And we, the province, right?
We, the province.
Yes.
We, the government.
Okay.
Believed that we had the ability to put conditions on the pipeline's development. The courts said, no, you can't.
And at what level were these courts, David?
We went all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada with the reference case.
Okay.
And we were also in federal court as well. The federal challenge was partly successful. But at the end of the day, the courts were clear, it's a federal project and hands off.
And what was the reference case that you guys used?
We put forward a proposed set of regulations that we if we had been successful, we would have made law, or if the court had given us direction about how to amend them to make them compliant with the Constitution. And the court rejected them.
Okay.
So we're in the position of obviously looking at a project that we don't like. We don't think benefits British Columbians. We think is the wrong direction in terms of resource development, and how do we live with that? And so part of it is really pushing, my colleague George Heyman has really been pushing around safety, around what can we do to maximize the information that British Columbians have about what's going through the pipeline, about how it's handled, about what we're going to do when the spill happens, because the spill will happen, because there have been multiple spills already on this pipeline, and how are we going to react to it? Or will we have another situation like we had with the tanker that leaked the bunker fuel in the middle of English Bay on a calm summer day, and
that was unbelievable.
It was a huge mess, and the reaction was brutal in terms of cleanup. So, so that's where we see our opportunity here, is to really make sure that we can, as best as possible, protect British Columbia's economy and British Columbians from the spill when it happens.
So to simplify this, it sounds to me like you guys have accepted fate in a sense that this pipeline will be built now. And so now it's more of an effort of trying to ensure that there's the utmost amount of safety regulations in place and security for the environment. Is that a fair comment?
Well, the federal government has bought it. I mean, obviously, it's not something that that British Columbia was enthusiastic about taxpayer dollars going towards, but in any event,
I think a lot of Canadians were excited about that.
In any event, they did buy it, and so we'll see. I mean, I know the Premier John Horgan has been in regular conversations with Justin Trudeau about the federal investment and what they're going to do with it and what they're going to run through the pipeline, and is there a way to provide some additional value add to the product before we export it, and these kinds of things. Obviously it changes the game to have the federal government involved, and so we're in those conversations.
Okay. Do you know what the status is of this development of the twinning of the TMX pipeline? Is it being developed right now? Like, is there actually shovels in the ground and pipe being laid as we speak?
From the provincial perspective, the permits were being issued, and the construction, as I understand it, was underway.
It is underway.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you guys have any ways to at least stall this or defer it, or really to what level can you really ensure that there is safety for British Columbians and for our province and our environment? What can you do?
We do have a role, and there are opportunities for us to insist on minimum standards, but where they're outside of our constitutional authority. The proponent has the ability to go to the courts and say, let us ignore these rules that the province has put in place, which is what they did with Burnaby, and when Burnaby put rules in place that
the city of Burnaby put some rules.
That's right,
in?
and
okay.
then the court said, well, you're allowed to ignore those rules now. And construction of the pipeline. So we don't want to be in that position. We want to maintain our role here, obviously, to ensure that British Columbians are as protected as possible.
Mm-hmm. So when you say you don't want to be in that position, does that mean you would not take something all the way to the courts? You would try.
No, I mean, if necessary, I guess we could. But I think that both the proponent and the province and the federal government, I think we all understand where the lines are that the court has drawn on the pipeline. And so the concern that I would have is, and I hear people say, oh, well, you should do this or you should do that. And the issue is that then the courts say, well, now you can just ignore British Columbia and go ahead.
Right.
And we don't want to be in that position.
Okay. And this decision that was made with the Supreme Court of Canada, that was that final decision, that was already on an appeal. Is that correct? Or was that?
Yeah, so it was on a reference case. It's a technical thing where governments can refer, send a case to their courts, send a proposal to their courts and say, is this constitutional? What do you think about this? And get an advance ruling, essentially.
Okay.
We were able to go to the Court of Appeal directly with that reference.
Yes.
And then there's an appeal as of right to the Supreme Court of Canada. So we lost to the Court of Appeal, appealed to the Supreme Court of Canada, and the Supreme Court of Canada dismissed our appeal.
And so in your view, there's a fundamental difference between twinning the TMX pipeline and the LNG, it was called LNG project, LNG Canada.
Yeah. So, I mean, here's a project, one project strongly opposed by First Nations, one project that has the support of almost every nation along the line, certainly every elected band council, and then there's the hereditary House issue in Wet'suwet'en. But by far the majority of First Nations along the line supporting the project. Compare TMX, where you're sending a raw product out of Canada to be refined in the LNG pipeline. There are significant and ongoing jobs in terms of the chilling and preparing of the product. It's within our climate change, our carbon emission restrictions that we put on ourselves as a government, as a province, to reduce our carbon emissions. The TMX pipeline, depending on how you count it, not so much, does not create that level of jobs for British Columbians and does not create that economic return for British Columbians that the LNG pipeline does. So they're very different projects.
Mm-hmm.
And
on the jobs front, David, can you speak at all to what the estimated numbers would be between the two?
No, I can't. I don't have those numbers in front of me, but certainly I'm happy to provide them to you for.
But you're certain that the LNG will provide more jobs than what TMX will do?
Oh, it's many more. Yeah, it's many more. Yeah, it's very significant. It's worth $40 billion over the lifetime of the project to British Columbia, and this is the single largest private sector investment in British Columbia's history. And so it's a significant opportunity for British Columbians, and it's not an easy one. I don't pretend that it's easy when you're talking about fossil fuel infrastructure and the concerns we have about climate. But it's the kind of give and take and discussion that we need to have about resource development in our province, and it certainly seemed to government that this was a net benefit to the province.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, for what it's worth, I fully support the idea of any type of resource where we're just basically cutting down trees or throwing raw bitumen into a pipeline and just exporting it raw off of our coastline as being a bad business model. So I support you guys for sure in trying to find ways in which to add value. Let's keep the jobs here. Let's do the work here, and instead of just shipping it off. Let's jump to money laundering. Mm-hmm. Tell me, where are we at, first of all, with respect to this? I think it's called the Cullen Commission. Mm-hmm. And before that, you had a report done by Mr. German, I think his name was.
Yeah.
So can you just, for listeners who aren't familiar with this topic, just to give a real brief layman's overview of since you guys took office, what's happened in the world of money laundering, what you guys have identified, what reports were produced, what's being done right now, and then we'll dive into some of the specific activities of what's going on in the future.
Okay. So before we were in government, the position of the British Columbia government was that there was that if there was illegal activity taking place in our casinos, that they would take action, that money laundering was not a significant issue in our real estate market, that there was no particular need to act on reform in either casinos or outside of casinos in relation to money laundering, that it was largely scare tactic and probably grievances from people who couldn't afford houses that was driving the speculation. After we formed government, when I released video of people walking bags of $20 bills into the casinos, and we disclosed that in 1 month, more than $100 million in bulk cash transactions had gone through BC casinos. And not only that everybody knew, the regulator, BC Lottery Corporation, the government knew that there was widespread money laundering in BC casinos. And they'd kept it secret. In fact, they had a secret report that they hadn't released about it. And we released that report. So it all came out into the open. We then hired Peter Sherman to do a couple reports for us, one on the casinos and then a follow-on about other sectors, including real estate. And there was a paired report from Maureen Maloney out of SFU with a team of international experts. And they said, yeah, money laundering is a problem in our real estate market. It's a problem in our luxury car market. It's not just casinos, obviously. People who are trying to launder cash look for different venues to do it. Mm-hmm. And so some really disturbing information about all of those sectors. I encourage those reports. I recommend them to anyone who's interested in learning more. To address those issues, major reforms in BC, world-leading reforms in British Columbia around a beneficial ownership registry for properties. If you want to buy property in British Columbia, the finishing touches are going on the electronic registry so that you have to actually declare who owns the trust, who owns the numbered company, who is the real person who owns that property. Mm-hmm. And if you don't declare it, the penalties are very significant. This a tool for regulators like Revenue Canada, police, and international journalists, because it's a public registry, to look and see, so who does own all of those suites in Trump Tower, which is something that American media have been speculating about ever since we announced the registry. And so that will be a very important tool. And then another beneficial ownership registry for corporations in British Columbia, if you have a BC company, who's the actual person who owns it. And that's an important tool. Police have been very frustrated when they have companies acting
That doesn't
illegally.
exist today, David?
No. And so the registry had to be created, and police and tax authorities can examine that registry.
When you create a
public
corporation
registry.
in sorry to interrupt, but
No,
when
go
you
ahead.
create a corporation in BC, David, like a private, I'm just thinking of, I've got a couple private companies.
Yep.
When our lawyers go to set up that company, we have to declare, like, what is the breakdown of shareholders, who they are,
Yes.
who's the board of directors, who's
Yes.
the secretary, who's the president of the company. Is that information not attainable to the government and various authorities?
There are ways to insulate the true owner from the police and from tax authorities.
Oh, really?
And so when you have a company that owns a company, especially when the company's out of province in a jurisdiction that does protect the secrecy, or when your sole director is a lawyer, and then you invoke solicitor-client privilege over any sort of trust agreements or anything related to the company,
Yeah.
then you can conceal that. But this legislation prevents that. And so it was a huge frustration to police that they couldn't figure out who the actual owners were of some of these companies that were engaged in illegal activity in the province, and tax authorities too. And so we're hopeful it'll be a good tool for them. So we're transitioning from the Vancouver model. My goal, transition from the Vancouver model of money laundering, which became internationally famous. Again, worth a Google if that's a new term for your listeners.
Right. There was a term for it, right?
Yeah, the Vancouver model of money laundering, and to be the Vancouver model of money laundering prevention. We've got a number of reforms that are addressing that. And one of the pieces I want to underline is the speculation tax. We have said that if you own properties and you're keeping it vacant and you're holding it as an investment, that you need to pay a different tax level on that, because it has knock-on impacts on British Columbians, and we need to mitigate those by investing that money in affordable housing. And so that tool also is in place, and it's raised now hundreds of millions of dollars, and that have gone into affordable housing.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And 11,000 rental housing markets, rental housing units have come on the market because of that tax. Because if you rent out your unit and don't just leave it vacant, then you can avoid the tax entirely. So,
Sure.
good idea.
Yeah. Well, I live up in West Point Grey,
Mm-hmm.
and as you know, because I've talked to you about this many times before, my neighborhood is pretty much void of any human being, or had been, because they were owned by what I would speculate were offshore owners. And there's a lot more people there now.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Oh, great.
yeah.
Glad to hear that. Glad to hear that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I can identify 4 houses that there are people living in them now.
Wow.
So yeah,
Well, it's good to hear that
Yeah.
sort of frontline.
I don't know. I'm
Feedback.
assuming that's the reason. I got to think, because otherwise, like you said, the penalties.
StatsCan tells us it's a big factor.
Yeah. Look, we've talked about this subject a lot. We talked about actually on the last podcast, and you just mentioned it, which is this beneficial ownership registry. You talked about, this is new to me, but that police and other authorities haven't had access to seeing who the owners are of private corporations in BC. And this all goes back to, in my world, in the financial markets, I mean, what they call AML and KYC. So KYC is know your client. AML, of course, is anti-money laundering. And it's amazing to me when I contrast the financial services industry, which is regulated by the BC Securities Commission and IROC, the Investment Industry Regulatory Authority of Canada, and what I have to go through. So, David, you want to become a client of mine. I'm a financial advisor. You want to become a client of mine. The amount of information I have to attain from you and your wife to have you just open up a simple RSP account is insane. There's a lot of information, maybe a little more than you should have to give, but there's a lot. And it comes down to, like, who's your employer, getting your social insurance number, what's your net worth, what's your income, what are your sources of income. And then we have to submit all this information, of course, to the institutions like FinTrack. And I'd love to get your thoughts on FinTrack. By contrast, when I look at like what you have to submit to a realtor to buy some real estate, it's virtually nothing. So I'm a big fan of, and I've personally been really skeptical over this. I know before you guys became into government, you talked about that the real estate prices had risen a lot in Vancouver, and a lot of homes became unaffordable because of offshore money. And my argument has always been, well, how about maybe it's because of the fact that debt's been so damn cheap for the last 20 years. Maybe there's other factors. I believe the answer is, we don't know till we have the data, and we've never collected the data as far as I'm concerned. Now you're going to do that, which I think is really smart, because if you collect the data, if you find out who the beneficial owners are, you find out where they live, you find out where their residence is, what their citizenship, whatever you want to call it, get that data together, you can compile it. Now you can make a clear distinction. You can either support the argument that this real estate has risen in value beyond affordability for most people because of foreign money, or it hasn't. But my concern that I have, and we talked about this in our last podcast, is this registry is going to be public, right? And I can see on one hand, if you don't make it public, then people can say, well, you're hiding information as a government. But on the flip side, there's a safety concern over public information of me being able to identify, I'll throw in a name that everybody knows, Jimmy Pattison. And I can go and see exactly what homes he owns. And, or yourself, David, for that matter. Like, where do you live? What do you own, right? And there's a safety factor there. Bonnie Henry's just been recently apparently been threatened. I mean, it's horrendous what she's had to go through. I mean, that woman of everybody. But it shouldn't be right that people can just publicly see what does Bonnie Henry own in real estate. Can you comment to that, please?
Yeah. So the reality is, for 95% of British Columbians and property owners, they list their names in the Land Title Registry, and that is exactly what you can do. You can look at an address in British Columbia, you can get the property identifier number, you can find out who owns it, you can search that registry today.
Yeah.
There are a group of people who own property through corporations, numbered corporations, through trusts, through proxy owners, and those are the people who will be affected by this. And you can already go and see the companies that Jimmy Pattison owns and which houses they own and so on, assuming that he's structured the companies in that way that there's that level of transparency. But soon, tax authorities and others will be able to see that and use the beneficial property ownership registry to identify those.
Okay, so tax authorities will, police will, but will you and I as a public member of the public be able to actually log onto a website, pull up an address, and because what you just referenced, the registry?
Yes, the Land Title Registry.
Land Title Registry?
Yeah.
In order to get that information, you actually have to pay, I think it's like $12.50 for each name.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it makes it prohibitive for someone to just snoop around, so to speak. And that's, I'm not concerned about the odd person who might want to take a look, especially when lawyers run registry for transactions. But how is this going to look? Can you describe for us? Is it something that I'm going to literally like click on a map and go, oh, I wonder who lives in that house?
Yeah, I don't know what decisions, if any, the finance minister has made about cost to access or anything like that.
Yeah.
But I do know that information of who actually owns the property, or who who says they own the property, let's put it that way, or the company that owns the property, is all available right now.
Yeah.
There are certainly cases where you would, for public safety reasons, not want someone's name in the registry. Mm-hmm. And the most commonly given, and one where there's an explicit exemption in the legislation, is around someone fleeing violence. You've got you got a spouse that's a violent person trying to track down where did their partner go, and so this is an example of those. So you do need to have those kinds of safeguards, and that's absolutely true.
Yeah. So who makes those decisions, David? Like, who is? I mean, obviously, it sounds like you guys are thinking about that. You're not going to be foolish enough as to just publish things without taking those considerations into play. But how does it? Who makes those decisions? How are those decisions made?
So the finance minister issued a white paper about how the beneficial ownership registry would work, and received recommendations from a number of different groups around exactly this kind of thing, so that we avoided as many unintended consequences as possible.
Okay.
And those issues all existed under the old Land Title Registry. Yeah. And so these aren't new problems to deal with. So they're going to exist under the beneficial ownership registry as well. The only difference will be that you can't hide behind a numbered company or an offshore trust or these kinds of things anymore.
Okay. So let's fast forward to the date in which you guys have this public registry available. Now, CRA, the police, yourselves, everybody can get access to this. What do you see as the next step? Because clearly identifying who owns what, I think, is a great step forward. I very much support that. Now you start to identify, oh, this house is owned by a politically exposed person or someone who's, is on some list somewhere, a bad boy list. Yeah. What's the next steps? How do you deal with that?
Well, there are a whole array of enforcement options that are available, all the way from police investigations to financial regulator investigations, Revenue Canada investigations, and so on. The challenge I found is that these matters are complex. They can be low return to Revenue Canada. Like you get a huge number of auditors on a single file, and then you do the math about how much it costs to do the investigation versus what you got back in terms of lost taxes. And it's better to chase the people who aren't declaring tips or the corner store that screwed up their filing or whatever it is in terms of a return per auditor. And so we've really been pushing Ottawa to dedicate those resources and say, look, in terms of people's public confidence in the tax system, you really need to dedicate people to following up on this work. And so at the provincial level, the Ministry of Finance, that work has already begun in relation to the declarations that were made around the speculation tax. And that work is absolutely vital to identify tax fraud, money laundering, and other kinds of work. I'm very frustrated by groups like FinTrack, and I don't blame anyone that works there, let's get that straight, around government policy and laws related to FinTrack. That the emphasis is on collecting information, bringing in all this information, and then that's kind of it. That's the whole focus, is gathering the information. What about the enforcement end of things?
Exactly.
What about actually following up on the information? How does that happen? It's so frustrating to watch.
Yeah. FinTrack's virtually had no prosecutions since they started doing increasing their vigilance on AML.
Yes. So the challenge is, they collect this information. They say it's available for prosecutions, available for police, and then the police say, well, we don't have resources. And then, it goes around and around, and there's nobody finally saying, okay, this is it. And to see the federal government, just before Christmas this past year, they defunded a financial crime center of excellence in Ontario that had about 200 RCMP officers working on financial crime nationally. And they dismantled it. And so that really broke my heart, because we're pushing the feds, like, you guys need to have national level police on this, because it's international flows of money. And so, at the provincial level, we've beefed up our anti-money laundering unit related to the casinos and the activity in the casinos, and also the inspectors that are in the casinos and that kind of thing, which, the casinos are closed now. So, that's another story. But, enforcement is important, and you need to have somebody doing the audits, and you need to have a consequence of the audits, and you need to collect the information, but then you actually need to use the information.
So do you have a concern that you guys are going to put a ton of time and resources and energy into exposing the truth, so to speak, of who owns what and who is responsible for this so-called money laundering problem that Vancouver has developed, to have it fall on deaf ears federally, because that's their job, is to do the enforcement and prosecution. Is that a concern of yours?
Yeah, I'm frustrated about that kind of thing. We saw the Silver International prosecution fall apart, which was a federal prosecution. It was very hard to watch. So it is a fear of mine. But I can assure you and your listeners that the province, in the areas where we have authority, we're aggressively moving on that. And the reason isn't, some people say, you're going to chase all this economic activity out and people are just going to do it somewhere else. I don't understand why you're so focused on this kind of crime. There was a shooting in Richmond last week involving two of the principals alleged to be involved in the Silver International file. One was killed. They were at a Japanese restaurant in Richmond, public. One was killed and one was injured. And so these things are directly connected to gang crime, to violent crime, and we can't ignore it.
Absolutely. And money makes the world go round, including the criminal world. So we have to stamp it out. To dumb this down for the average British Columbian of how money laundering works, let's say I run into $2 million. I was going to say a million, but you can't buy anything for $2 million these days in Vancouver. So I got $2 million of illegal money. How the heck do I launder that into buying a house in Vancouver? Because I can hear people, they listen to this on the news, they see you get, you're being quoted about this money laundering problem we have, but I don't think the average, because most of us are law-abiding citizens. We're not laundering money. We're going to our job, paying our taxes, and we buy our house with a mortgage. Yeah. How does a person actually launder money in this province?
Sure. First, I would really recommend, if you're looking for podcast guests, Peter German might be a good person to reach out to. This is where he's an international expert, wrote the book on it, did the reports for British Columbia.
Okay.
But I've had a whole education in this as well, because when I was the critic for gaming, I was brought into a casino, and people patiently explained to me how it was basically impossible to launder money through a BC casino, and I fell for it. I am very frustrated that that happened. Because when I became minister, obviously that wasn't true. So there's a public inquiry underway to answer that question for British Columbians. Justice Cullen is running that inquiry, and the witnesses will tell British Columbians what they know about how it actually happens in our province. There's two parts to money laundering. One is the part where you have all of these bills that are really hard to manage, and you need to either get them into larger bills or get them into the system somehow. And the second piece is, once you have them in the system, to move them through multiple channels to conceal the original origin of the funds. And so our casinos were involved in part of that, where the bulk bills were coming in and being loaned to or being given to gamblers, who were then paying for that money through bank account transfers. And in that way, the gangsters were able to get these really hard to handle $20 bills out of their pockets and get a bank transfer in to pay for that money from some other jurisdiction. And so then it's in the system. And once it's in the system, then you can layer it through multiple transactions. People have raised concerns about lawyers' trust accounts, because when it passes through a lawyer's trust account, the privilege can attach, and that can mean that authorities don't know where it came from or where it went. As one key sector that the international community has raised concerns about in Canada, but also through businesses and other transactions, trade transactions back and forth between different countries, parent trade transactions that aren't actually. So the federal government has, to their credit, put some money into trade-based money laundering and these kinds of movement of assets internationally to try to follow that up. So it's quite a sophisticated business. Another example in British Columbia is people walking bags of money in to pay for luxury cars, loading the luxury cars into containers to sell overseas, where there's an arbitrage play where essentially you can sell the car for more in a third country. So you pay cash for the car, you load the car into a container.
You can pay for a car with cash here in BC?
Yes, that was part of Dr.
Can you still
German's.
do that?
Yes, you can. Yeah, we've been working with police and others to put restrictions in place, but there is this issue of the arbitrage play where the car is worth more money in another country, and so that's another example of how this is being done. And so I suspect that in the public inquiry, they'll uncover even other methodologies of how people get the money into the system and then move it around.
Yeah.
And I've asked them to examine it as thoroughly as they can and report out to the public.
Okay. It's a complex issue.
It is. And people's
you guys have
eyes
a big fight.
can glaze over. And I think the connection to real estate is really what kept it front and center for people in Metro Vancouver, and why it's so important to British Columbians.
Yeah. Let's to wrap this up, David, let's go back to the election. Okay. We have an election with COVID happening. So my question is, how hard is it to engage with people about things other than COVID? We've done a good job here of talking about that, but it seems like whenever you turn on the news, it's almost like nobody wants to talk about anything other than COVID. But I'd like to think that voters, when they go to the polls, will be thinking about more than just COVID, because you're probably right. This pandemic is being an issue we're going to be dealing with a year from now. Hopefully not 4 from now. Mm-hmm. And you guys are looking for a 4-year mandate. Mm-hmm. So can you comment on that?
Yeah, I think the vision for what kind of rebuilding and how we're going to do that in the province, where the investments should be to help us rebuild better. I hope that is an election issue. I hope it's one that shows up. I mean, I'm hearing from Andrew Wilkinson, he wants to cancel the speculation tax. He wants to cancel a modest increase in tax on people who are earning significantly more money that was used to pay for things like childcare, and reduce costs for families that were really struggling, and middle-class families. And so, he's got a vision. It's a different vision. If he's going to do tax cuts, he's going to have to cut some of those childcare services, and he's going to have to cut some of the housing services that we funded, which would be hard to take. There's a contrast between the two parties, and I think that that contrast will be the topic of the discussion, and it won't be exclusively COVID.
Okay. There's a fellow on my team that works for me. His name's Sean, and he let me talk about Sean. He's 25. He's a bright guy, salesperson on our team, starting to earn income that's got some decent tax impacts now, but he's doing well for himself. I asked him the other day about his thoughts on the election. He didn't know we had an election, basically.
Mm-hmm.
He's completely unengaged. He's more interested in knowing what's going on with sports, and I don't blame him. He's 25 years old. He's a single guy. Good-looking guy, by the way, ladies, if you want to meet Sean. How do you get younger people, because the majority of people that vote, of course, are going to be the older generation, which is kind of called the boomers, right? But the millennials, I mean, of course, you've got somebody like on your team like Bo Emma, who's going to come on here next week. She's engaged so much that she became an MLA. But there's a lot of people that are in that age category that just aren't engaged. How do you get them engaged, David? How do you get Sean engaged?
Yeah, I think part of the story is people like Bowen and we have a candidate in Vancouver, Langara, Tessica Trong, who's just amazing, another young person running, and so these folks really do activate a different base, a different group of people who are enthusiastic about change and see the opportunities and also see the crises that are coming for us, the climate crisis and others. And so it's quite exciting what's happening. I'm really seeing young people stepping up. I think we will have a huge number of young people participating, just with everything that's been happening with the fires along the West Coast and with the discussion about the direction of our province and COVID and other things. People are just paying more attention, and I think I'm very hopeful for that. And the other piece, Andrew, is there was a deliberate decision, in my opinion, that was made to disenfranchise young people by the previous government by setting the fixed election date in the spring, in May. The then leader of the party, Gordon Campbell, was in the UBC constituency, and I am sure that it crossed his mind that if he had a fixed election date in the fall, in October, there would be a lot of young people voting. And so that meant that students are spread all over the province instead of at their post-secondary institutions when voting day came. And we know, Coca-Cola knows, Pepsi knows that the habits that you form in your post-secondary education last for the rest of your life, and that includes voting. And so I'm hopeful that we see that kind of turnout this time.
Okay, good. Who are candidates you are really excited about during this election?
So Tessica is one of them for sure. Brenda Bailey in Vancouver Falls Creek, she just got nominated. She comes from the tech world, did some really neat work with women in technology, and is a successful entrepreneur on her own. A really neat candidate, Nikki Sharma, who's running in Vancouver Hastings, Shane Simpson's old seat. Up north, we have on the island Rob Douglas, a really neat leader that. And the consistent theme among these folks, they're young, they're enthusiastic, and they're ready to go, and they're going to shape the future of BC politics, and they're not just the usual suspects, and they're really going to shake things up.
You've pulled out a couple of heavyweights too.
They're going to shake things up
with your friend Nathan.
Yeah,
Cullen,
Nathan Cullen's up in Skeena, coming
Murray
from the federal
Rankin.
side. Yeah, Murray, and we have. The mayor of Tofino, who's running for us in Alberni there,
right?
And so there are some great candidates coming out, and I'm certainly excited about the people who are stepping up to run.
Now, our Minister of Finance, our former Minister of Finance, Carol James, she sadly is not going to be rerunning because she's sadly been diagnosed with Parkinson's. I think it was what it was announced, and she's our Minister of Finance, or had up until this election. Assuming you guys win, do you have any speculation who the next Minister of Finance would be? Because that's a pretty important role.
Yeah, it's a really important role, and assuming we form government, which is a big assumption, there's a big election, and campaigns, as I say, really matter.
Yeah.
The Premier will have an important decision to make about a finance minister, but not just that, around cabinet.
Yeah.
As we just said, there are a lot of really neat people who are running that bring diverse backgrounds and perspectives potentially to the cabinet table. And I don't assume for a second that the roles that the Premier had me in before are the same ones that would show up for me next time, or even that there would be one at all. I got to hustle.
Okay.
And I hope the Premier approves of the work I've done, and then I'm back at the cabinet table. But that's going to be his call to make if we cross the line.
Well, that's a humble comment. I don't know. Maybe it'll be you that is the Minister of Finance. So we'll see.
We'll see.
Well, David, thanks for coming on today. Good luck to you and your team.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's been a really good conversation, and hopefully people got something out of this. And hopefully we'll be seeing you as David Eby MLA for Vancouver. What's our area called? Vancouver Point Grey.
Yeah.
If people want to get involved, they want to help you out, what can they do?
davideby.ca is the website for all your campaign-related information.
Okay. Great. Well, David Eby, thank you for coming on the show today. Best of luck.
Thanks for having me, man.
Okay.
It was a lot of fun.
That was good. Thanks.